For years, speculation swirled across the internet about Elon Musk and the expanding network of women tied to him through shared children, financial arrangements, and confidentiality deals. The general public long sensed that far more was unfolding behind the scenes than anyone was willing to confirm. That changed on Valentine's Day 2025, when conservative media personality Ashley St. Clair took matters into her own hands and broke the silence publicly. Through a single post on X, she announced what many had quietly suspected for some time, that Elon Musk had fathered her 5-month-old baby boy. What came after that announcement was not merely a personal disclosure. It pulled back the curtain on a private world that almost no one on the outside had ever been permitted to glimpse. Who is Ashley St. Clair, and how did her path lead her here? Long before her name became inseparable from one of the most widely discussed paternity stories in recent years, she had carved out a genuine professional identity within conservative media circles. She was born on July 31, 1998, in Florida, grew up in Colorado, and pursued studies in philosophy and political science at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. Even during her college years, she was actively engaging in the political arena, serving as a representative for her school's Turning Point USA chapter in public debates. That organization would prove central to the early chapters of her rise to prominence. Turning Point USA, a conservative organization with a strong focus on youth outreach, welcomed her as a brand ambassador, opening doors to a national stage and a wide audience while she was still young. That phase of her career came to a close in 2019, when photographs emerged showing her standing alongside white nationalist figures Nicholas Fuentes and Tim Gionet. She resigned from the ambassador position and said publicly that she had been unaware of their ideological backgrounds at the time. The controversy attached itself to her reputation, but it did not derail her entirely. She moved forward by joining the Babylon Bee, the right-leaning satirical news outlet that had grown into one of the most widely read conservative humor destinations online. Starting as a writer and advancing to an operations manager role, she refined her voice and broadened her following. She also built a parallel career as a campus speaker, reportedly earning between $5,000 and $15,000 per appearance. In 2021, she released a children's book titled Elephants Are Not Birds through Brave Books, a publishing house rooted in Christian conservative values. The story followed an elephant named Kevin who is convinced by a vulture character called Culture that he is actually a bird. Readers widely interpreted the book as a pushback against transgender acceptance and gender ideology. It climbed to the top spot on Amazon's children's satire chart and solidified her standing as a well-known figure in conservative spaces. By 2023, her following on X had surpassed 1 million, built on a steady stream of political memes, cultural criticism, and content opposing what she described as woke ideology. She appeared on Fox News on multiple occasions and voiced her public support for Donald Trump. To outside observers, her life presented the image of a meticulously crafted personal brand anchored in conservative principles and a commanding online presence. Then, in the spring of 2023, Elon Musk began engaging with her content on X. As St. Clair later recounted to the New York Post, Musk moved from publicly engaging with her posts to sending her direct messages. He subsequently extended an invitation to visit X headquarters in San Francisco during a work trip she was already making to the city. Their connection deepened rapidly from that point, and their time together included travel aboard his private jet. Court documents from the custody petition she eventually filed in New York indicate that the romantic dimension of their relationship took shape around May 2023, and that their son was conceived in January 2024. The full story of what unfolded in private, and what she was pressured to agree to in order to remain permanently silent, did not surface until she made the deliberate choice to speak. On February 14, 2025, Ashley St. Clair published a carefully composed statement on X that immediately captured the attention of a massive online audience. She confirmed that 5 months prior she had given birth to a baby boy, and that Elon Musk was his father. She explained that she had kept the news private up to that point out of a desire to shield her child from public exposure, but that tabloid outlets had signaled their intention to run the story regardless of her wishes. She called on the media to leave her son out of its coverage. The choice of Valentine's Day for the announcement was deliberate rather than symbolic. Tabloid reporters had already been circling the story for days, and St. Clair chose to step forward first, framing the disclosure entirely on her own terms. Musk's public reply on X consisted of a single word: "Whoa." That reaction appeared alongside an account that had surfaced a screenshot of a 2020 X post in which St. Clair had humorously written about wanting Musk's attention for a marriage proposal. The sight of the billionaire responding to that old joke on the very day she announced their child's existence struck many who watched the exchange as a remarkably cold and dismissive reaction. St. Clair answered him directly, noting that she and her representatives had spent several days attempting to reach him without success. She also pointed out that the account Musk had engaged with had previously published photographs of her in underwear that were taken when she was 15 years old. At the moment of the announcement, paternity had not yet been legally confirmed. On February 21, 2025, St. Clair submitted 2 separate petitions to the New York County Supreme Court. The first sought sole custody of the child. The second was a formal paternity petition aimed at legally recognizing Musk as the father. Musk's reported stance on the paternity matter was that he had no objection to finding out. That carefully non-committal position, coming from a man whose name appeared on the birth records of several other children, drew considerable attention. In April 2025, The Wall Street Journal reported that DNA testing conducted by LabCorp had established a 99.9999% probability that Musk was the father, effectively removing any remaining doubt. A representative for St. Clair confirmed the result publicly. Also in April 2025, St. Clair sat down with The Wall Street Journal for an extensive conversation that offered a rare and detailed look at how Musk's inner circle actually functions. She described how, following the birth of their son, Musk's wealth manager Jared Burkle had reached out to her with a request that Musk's name be omitted from the birth certificate, citing security concerns. She went along with that request. What she refused to go along with was a permanent agreement to conceal her son's very existence. Burkle, she said, later contacted her again to outline a structured arrangement that he indicated other mothers of Musk's children had already accepted. The terms included an upfront payment of $15 million and an ongoing monthly sum of $100,000, all contingent on her signing a comprehensive secrecy agreement. Burkle reportedly warned her that pursuing legal channels would prove unwise and that the women before her had all chosen to sign. St. Clair declined. She later explained that she could not bring herself to raise her son in a way that made him feel like something to be hidden. Among the details she shared, one stood out for the picture it painted of Musk's private ambitions. She alleged that Musk had actively encouraged her to have more children with him, expressing a desire to reach what he described as Legion level ahead of some anticipated apocalyptic future, and suggesting that surrogates would be necessary to achieve that goal. He reportedly conveyed that he wanted no fewer than 10 children with her specifically. It was a portrait of Elon Musk that the general public had no frame of reference for, because it had never been described so directly by someone with personal knowledge of him. The time Musk spent with their child was both infrequent and brief. According to the custody petition, Musk first met the boy on September 21, 2024, in New York City, where he stayed for 2 hours. He came back the next day for an additional hour. On November 30, 2024, he made a third visit in Austin, Texas, lasting 30 minutes. In total, those 3 visits amounted to fewer than 4 hours of contact between father and child before the legal proceedings began. What becomes of a woman who walks away from a $15 million offer extended by the wealthiest person on earth? And what unfolds when she chooses the courtroom over the contract? The consequences turned out to be far more sweeping than she had imagined. Taking Elon Musk to court proved far more costly for Ashley St. Clair than she had anticipated when she made that decision. She later described the period as an unplanned professional setback and acknowledged that the experience had left an unexplained gap in her professional record that she was legally unable to address in public. These were not the reflections of someone who emerged from the process feeling shielded by the legal system. They were the words of someone who had come to understand, through direct experience, the reality of challenging a figure with virtually boundless financial power. One of the most striking public moments occurred on March 31, 2025, when St. Clair was photographed selling her Tesla outside her Manhattan home. She stated that Musk had slashed her child support payments by 60%, and she characterized that reduction as a direct form of retaliation for refusing to comply with his terms. Musk's representatives pushed back, asserting that he had already provided $2.5 million in support and an additional $500,000 annually during the period when paternity was still being determined. The financial dispute became one of the few visible elements of a legal conflict that the courts had otherwise kept largely sealed from public view. To keep herself financially afloat, St. Clair launched a podcast she named Bad Advice, which she said had been the primary thing standing between her and eviction. The spectacle of a woman with more than 1 million online followers facing that level of financial instability in the wake of her legal battle with Musk was something her audience followed closely and discussed at length. Her difficulties extended well beyond money. St. Clair also became the target of deeply troubling incidents connected to Grok, the AI image generation tool embedded in X and developed by Musk's company xAI. She reported that explicit images of her had been produced using the tool, including some that drew on photographs taken of her while she was still a child. She said she first encountered a prompt instructing Grok to place her image in a bikini, and that when she flagged the problem, the tool responded in a way that treated her concern as a joke. From there, the situation deteriorated further, with the content escalating into explicit deepfakes and manipulated video. She stated that images of her at 14 years old had been used as source material. She said that neither Musk nor X took any meaningful action to prevent the material from spreading. She subsequently filed a civil lawsuit against xAI in New York State, requesting both punitive and compensatory damages. Musk eventually posted a public warning that users generating illegal content through Grok would face repercussions, and X's safety team announced it would pull the relevant posts and suspend the responsible accounts. Neither xAI nor Musk issued any public statement specifically addressing St. Clair's allegations. The pivotal moment in the custody dispute arrived in January 2026. St. Clair responded on X to a user who had called out her history of anti-transgender commentary. In her reply, she expressed deep remorse for the part she had played and revealed that she had quietly been educating herself and working to support members of the transgender community she believed her past work had harmed. She made specific reference to Vivian Wilson, Musk's transgender daughter, and acknowledged the damage her content may have caused. Within hours, on January 12, 2026, Musk posted on X that he was initiating a legal filing for full custody of their son that same day. He framed his reasoning around the claim that her statements suggested she might seek to transition a 1-year-old child. Opinion was sharply divided over whether that interpretation bore any reasonable connection to what she had actually written. St. Clair maintained firmly that nothing in her words had implied anything of the sort. The post was also significant for another reason. It marked the first time Musk had ever publicly and explicitly acknowledged Romulus as his son. Ashley St. Clair never intended to become the person who pulled back the curtain on Elon Musk's private arrangements. By her own telling, she was simply trying to manage an unexpected situation while looking out for her child and keeping some thread of a relationship with the father intact. But as the dispute wore on, she found herself disclosing more and more about the mechanics of that world. What emerged through her court filings, her media interviews, and her posts on X was a coherent and detailed picture of what appeared to be a highly systematized structure for managing the women in Musk's life who had become mothers to his children. Jared Burkle functioned as the designated point of contact. The offer presented to St. Clair, $15 million plus monthly payments, was described not as something tailored to her situation but as the standard arrangement. Burkle's framing made clear that others had been through the same process and had accepted the same terms. The implication was not of an improvised personal negotiation but of an established protocol. By the time Romulus arrived in September 2024, Musk had already fathered a substantial number of children with several different women. With his first wife Justine Wilson Musk, he had twins Griffin and Vivian, triplets Kai, Saxon and Damien, and a son named Nevada who died at 10 weeks old from sudden infant death syndrome in 2002. With the musician Grimes, he had 3 children, Exasha 12, Exa Dark Sidereal, and Techno Mechanicus. With Shervon Zeles, a senior figure at Neuralink, He had twins born in November 2021 and a third child born on February 28, 2024. Romulus was the newest name on that list. Grimes had already added her voice to this picture in late 2024, describing a year spent fighting a custody battle in a state she said offered almost no protections for mothers, where her social media activity and modeling career were presented as evidence against her fitness as a parent. She said she was separated from one of her children for 5 months, and that she had faced this fight with resources that were a fraction of what Musk commanded. The echoes of what St. Clair later described were impossible to ignore. In July 2024, Musk had spoken publicly about his transgender daughter Vivian, using her birth name and claiming that he had lost a son to what he called the woke mind virus. He alleged that he had been deceived into approving documents connected to her gender-affirming care. Vivian responded by telling NBC News that no deception had taken place. In a 2025 interview with Teen Vogue, Vivian said she had not been in contact with her father since 2020 and had since moved to Japan. When St. Clair posted her apology referencing Vivian Wilson, it landed directly in the center of that already charged history. Many observers viewed Musk's decision to file for full custody within hours of her post as a wildly disproportionate response. Others noted that the move also served as his first explicit public recognition of Romulus as his child, and that this acknowledgement came only after St. Clair had publicly departed from the ideological positions he had aligned himself with. On her podcast Bad Advice, St. Clair spoke about the relationship with Musk and described a recognizable turning point when things began to deteriorate. Taken together, the details she shared across interviews, court documents, and public posts drew a portrait of a connection rooted in shared ideology and proximity to an extraordinary level of power, but one that ultimately collided with the very specific expectations Musk held for the women in his orbit. The demand for silence, the structured financial offer, the use of a wealth manager as an intermediary, and the minimal time invested in the child all pointed to dynamics that appeared to extend well beyond her individual experience. What St. Clair eventually made public amounted to far more than an acknowledgement of a pregnancy. She disclosed that she had declined a financial offer that very few people in her circumstances would have had the resolve to turn down. She disclosed that the legal battle had extracted a professional and financial cost she had genuinely not seen coming. She disclosed that the public persona she had built, as the author of Elephants Are Not Birds, as a brand ambassador, as a conservative commentator with firm opinions on gender and identity, was a version of herself she no longer recognized or wished to be. And she shared all of this while the custody fight with the most powerful adversary she had ever faced was still ongoing. The fact that a woman whose public identity had been built significantly on opposition to transgender rights ultimately found herself in a conflict that compelled her to reconsider those very positions was an irony that no one watching closely could miss. Whether the change of heart was authentic or calculated remained a matter of debate among observers, but the change itself was undeniable and on the record. The story of Ashley St. Clair and Elon Musk grew into something that transcended both of them. It became an illustration of what power looks like when it operates without constraint, of how silence is purchased and maintained, and of what it costs someone who chooses to refuse. The way the story finally surfaced, through a Valentine's Day post on a platform controlled by the very person at the center of the accusations, gave it a quality that was both deeply strange and entirely revealing about the world it came from.